It started with a shake, not the kind that destroys cities, but one so quiet that it could have been mistaken for the sound of wind blowing across the ground. Seismologists observed vibrations that were continuous, rhythmic, and planned, which had never been seen before. Not chaos, but rhythm. The Earth was alive. At first, they thought it was just a coincidence. Machines get data wrong. As they always did, the plates moved. What was new? Volcanoes erupted, tides rose, and storms raged. But suddenly the patterns showed up. Tremors happened at the same time as lunar cycles, equinoxes, and things that shouldn't have had anything to do with geology. Scientists from opposite ends of the world compared notes and found that they were in tune. Earth was not simply busy, it was responsive. Then the first whisper came. Sonar buoys deep in the Pacific picked up vibrations that weren't random, but had structure, like the syllables of a word that was too big for anyone to say. Submarines tracked the pulse, and the people on board said the ocean floor was talking. For some it was stress. For some it was language. What it heard wasn't ready for the world. The United Nations held an emergency council meeting in 2041. Not for war or hunger, but for a concept that shook the very foundations of human knowledge. What if the Earth itself was alive? There were a lot of delegates in the room, but everyone was looking at one screen. There, after going through layers of seismic code and AI interpretation, was the first real sentence of the planet. "Why do you hurt me?" The words rang out through the crowd like a death bell. Some of the delegates cried. Some people laughed uneasily and said it was made up. But the shaking kept going. Earthquakes happened in areas where trees were cut down. There were rumblings from volcanoes under mining areas. Storms got worse where the oceans had been polluted. The Earth was no longer neutral. It was doing something. Overnight, religions broke up. Priests in Rome said that the voice was God's anger, the living body of God finally speaking. People in Delhi said that the ancient mother had finally stopped being quiet. Some churches in the Americas burnt down, while others grew and thrived, each claiming to know what the voice really meant. Scientists also broke up. Biologists debated the concept of Earth as a singular, colossal creature, positing a planetary nervous system beneath the crust and oceans. Physicists said that consciousness on that level was not feasible, but the data stayed. The voice came back not in random shakes, but in a steady rhythm. "You are fire in my blood. You are shadows in my lungs." The message was plain. People were a disease. People all throughout the world were scared. The markets fell apart and governments rushed to fix things. For hundreds of years, people thought they were in charge of the world. Now it knew it was a guest who had stayed too long. Civilizations argued not over how to grow, but about how to say sorry. But how do you ask a planet for forgiveness? Engineers in Tokyo suggested making huge resonance machines that could speak back, using earthquake frequencies. In Geneva, diplomats wrote the first treaties for the whole Earth, not between countries, but between people and the ground they stand on. In Nairobi, a young campaigner told millions, "If Earth is alive, then every step we take is on her skin. We are either caretakers or parasites." The words spread like wildfire. It looked like a simple option. But history has demonstrated that people never choose the easy way. Nature itself, not leaders, was the first to start a negotiation. A huge earthquake hit San Francisco, but it ceased suddenly, which was unlike from other earthquakes. Buildings shook, bridges broke, but then the tremor stopped in the middle of a surge, as if it were being held back. There was no doubt about the message. Earth could have destroyed the metropolis. Instead, it had given a warning. The ground under people's feet was no longer still. It was looking, listening, making a choice. Reality 999 began with the scariest thing of all. People didn't live on Earth. It resided within a creature that was big enough to store seas in her veins and mountains in her bones. And the being had just woken up. The quake in San Francisco changed everything. Before that, doubters had said that the voice of Earth was fake. Mistakes in instrumentation, AI misunderstanding, or a big lie to control countries. But as the earthquake halted in the middle of the surge, like a clenched fist that had been released, skepticism went away with it. People had to answer. Representatives from 200 countries met in Geneva under the huge glass dome of the Global Assembly. There had never been an agenda that was so strange or so important. It was a simple but mind-blowing question. How do you talk to a planet? Engineers from Tokyo showed off the resonance array, which is a huge underground device that mimics seismic waves. If the Earth communicated in earthquakes, maybe people could speak in the same way. They named it the Seismic Choir. Some of the delegates clapped. Some people laughed. The Secretary of Defense of the United States leaned in to speak. You want us to sing lullabies to dirt and stone? What if it sees our signal as aggressive? Do you want to make earthquakes happen on purpose? People in the hall started yelling. For the first time ever, the most powerful leaders in the world didn't dispute about weapons or borders. Instead, they argued about tone, rhythm, and meaning, how to not offend a world that was aware of what they were doing. Religious leaders also had their say. The Pope said that talking back was a sin, since it went against God's will. Hindu sages, on the other hand, supported the endeavor and said it was humanity's duty to live in harmony with the earth as a whole. Shamanic practices in South America and Africa were quite popular, with people saying they had listened to the earth for thousands of years, but never in words that were so clear, and the ground shook again while the leaders fought. You scrape my flesh. You make my blood sick. Why? As the translated message spread across every screen in the room, the assembly went silent. No one could deny it now. The earth was more than just aware. It was mad. The first test of the resonance array took place in Iceland, where geothermal areas made it possible to hear the planet's voice. Huge steel pylons went deep into the crust and vibrated at set frequencies. Scientists were crowded into control rooms, watching graphs flicker and wondering if their words made sense. The message was clear. We hear you. We want peace. Nothing happened for hours. Then when the sun rose, the earth spoke. Silence is peace. You are noise. The words hit like thunder. Some scientists were happy because they had gotten people to talk to each other. Others fell into despair. If peace meant that people had to be quiet, then living was a crime. At the same time, resistance grew. Preachers in the Midwest of the United States called the whole thing a lie, a ruse of the rich. One yelled to a gathering of thousands, "The earth is not alive. God gave it to us to rule. These shakes are falsehoods." Fans celebrated and burned effigies of the resonance array. Generals in Beijing said that if Earth could be talked to, it could also be threatened. What if we blow up weapons inside her mantle? Make her do it? Even the most experienced strategists were scared by the idea. To threaten Earth itself was to put your life on the line. Mara, a linguist from Nairobi, didn't expect to be at the heart of it all. She had spent her whole career researching dead languages and putting together bits of meaning. Now she had been hired to work on the Array project, which involved figuring out how to make sense of the tremors. She looked at the graphs for a long time and whispered, "This isn't simply rage. It's being alone." No one paid attention. Weeks went by and the tremors got worse. The number of storms doubled. In the Pacific Ring of Fire, volcanoes were active. The message was clear. Earth had been patient, but not forever. The ground shook again, this time worse than before, during the second global session. Lights flickered, glass broke, and delegates yelled. And then the words rolled like thunder under their feet. Make a choice. You or I. The ultimatum made the hall quiet. For the first time in history, people recognized they weren't talking to themselves anymore. It was fighting for the right to live. The ultimatum shocked the world as much as the seismic did. Make a choice. You or I. The words spread to every government office, embassy, cathedral, and home. Borders used to separate people, but now they were all afraid. For the first time, leaders had to negotiate without using troops or trade, but with humility or cunning. The Global Assembly became something bigger than the UN had ever been in Geneva. People called it the Parliament of Survival. Delegates who used to argue about punishment now whispered about extinction. Every action had the potential to save a species. Some people said that we should give up right away, break up industries, stop using fossil fuels, go back to simple farming, and ask the living world for forgiveness. Some people thought these notions were crazy. A senator from the northern states yelled, "To weaken ourselves is to give up our future. We shouldn't worship Earth. We should bargain with her." The argument didn't merely divide countries. It also split cultures. Faiths broke apart because of the stress. In Europe, churches were full of sermons saying that Earth was a new prophet and her voice was the last word. In America, sects sprung up and said that people were chosen to fight back, calling collaboration treason. In Africa and Asia, movements arose that saw the Earth as a relative and wanted treaties that recognized her as a sovereign being. There were rallies and counter-protests in the streets. Some people held signs that said, "We are parasites, forgive us," while others yelled, "We rule, not the soil." The resonance array became the center of the fight. In Iceland, protesters attached themselves to pylons and demanded silence so that people may listen instead of speak. The devices vibrated messages into the crust. At the same time, soldiers were stationed around the array to keep an eye on it and warned that it would be the only way to fight back if Earth launched war. Governments argued over who had control of the frequencies, each claiming that their voice should be the one that Earth heard. The French representative added, "If the world listens to what we say, then those words must be in the language of diplomacy, not orders." The Chinese envoy objected, saying, "If Earth is conscious, it only respects strength. Let it hear only one voice, ours." The tremors came back, not in words but in movements as the fights got worse. A hurricane hit the Caribbean, stronger than any other hurricane on record, but it stayed away from big cities, as if it were trying to protect them. At the same time, an earthquake in South America destroyed a mining complex that had poisoned waterways for a long period. The nearby villages were not harmed. Some people thought this showed that Earth could tell the difference between right and wrong. For some, it was confirmation that she was already judging. Inside the Parliament of Survival, moral arguments become tools of politics. Countries that relied on oil and coal for their economies fought against any plans to break up these businesses. One minister said, "If Earth wants silence, she asks us to leave billions of people in poverty. That is not a bargain. It is death." Countries who care about the environment were furious. What good is wealth if the ground beneath us opens up and eats it? The room rocked with shouting, as if the Earth itself was making fun of their lack of choice. In the middle of the commotion, Mara, the Nairobi linguist, stood in front of the group again. She had spent weeks studying the vibrations tempo, looking at the words, the pauses, the rhythms, and the meaning. Her voice didn't have power. It had clarity. Earth isn't handing us ultimatums just to be harsh. She is saying that she knows we can make choices. She wants to know if we can all act as one species instead of various tribes. It's not about being strong. It's about coming together. Some delegates clapped. Some people laughed, but her comments stayed with people, traveling from the chamber to homes, classrooms, and airwaves. People all throughout the world said her words. Act as one species. It turned into a movement, weak but developing, that asked for peace not just between people and the Earth, but also between people from different countries. But the cracks kept getting bigger. Generals in Moscow talked about seismic weapons that might hit the Earth back, promising payback for storms and earthquakes that have been going on for hundreds of years. Activists in Rio organized vigils where they lay down on the ground with their ears to the soil and whispered apologies into the dirt. And the Earth listened the whole time. During those weeks, her voice came back only once more, rumbling beneath the surface like thunder in the bones of mountains. I am patient, but patience runs out. The Parliament of Survival stopped talking. People had split up in response. The question was no longer if Earth was alive. The question was how long she would wait before she stopped asking. The warning was clear. I am patient, but patience runs out. People still fought with each other. The Parliament of Survival stopped working. Countries defended their businesses. Militaries spoke about weapons, and faith split even further. While the debates went on, the ground underneath them got ready to make its decision. It started out gently, like most judgments do. Birds left the sky of Southeast Asia. Whales left the Pacific, and their songs were oddly missing from the oceans. Dogs in cities barked in synchrony, howling as if they could feel the pulse rising from below. Seismographs went crazy, not with erratic spikes, but with constant waves that sounded like a heartbeat. Scientists sat at their screens in silence, knowing what was about to happen. And then it happened. A crack tore through the Indonesian islands, separating the sea and sky in an instant. What should have been a regular earthquake turned into something planned and thought out. It was as if an unseen hand pushed all of the tectonic plates to move at once. The ocean rose as the Earth breathed out. There were several waves in the tsunami, which rolled out like fingers of a clenched hand. Walls of water took up islands and wiped out towns in minutes. Jakarta disappeared under the dark, seething seas. Manila became quiet. The blow was felt even on faraway shores. Australia's beaches flooded, India's ports sank, and Hawaii was hit by unexpected walls of salt and foam. Billions of people watched in horror as satellites showed the devastation live. It wasn't nature, it was intention. Every surge hit cities, ports, and industrial areas that were connected to constant consumption. Fishing hubs that were infamous for overfishing fell apart. Refineries near the coast broke open, and the oil that spilled forth was quickly consumed by the waves. The water seemed to rise around the villages on higher ground, though. There was no doubt about the message. This wasn't mindless destruction. It was a penalty. In Geneva, the Parliament of Survival fell apart in a panic. Delegates yelled at each other across the room, demanding instant submission, military action, or silence. Some people wanted the resonance array taken down because they thought it had caused the strike. Others said they had to send another message asking for forgiveness, but the tremors came back, piercing through the noise. The translation of the words was very simple. You hurt me. I stand up for myself. The room froze. For hundreds of years, people have used the same words to justify war. Now the earth itself was the reason. The aftermath of the strike was like the end of the world. Hundreds of millions of people were forced to leave their homes, economies were ruined, and supply lines were cut. As the coasts turned into graveyards, refugees flooded inland. The number of deaths was hard to understand, but the psychological toll was far worse. People had always thought that natural disasters were fair. Now they were sentences that were given by a conscious will. Overnight, religions changed. Some others said that the tsunami was God's punishment and told their followers to leave cities and go back to simpler lives. Some people declared war on the earth, calling her a false divinity that should be fought. In capitals all around the world, the military made backup plans for what they dubbed planetary conflict. Underground tests were done on weapons, and people spoke of explosions to remind the earth who rules. But a different movement grew among the wreckage. Survivors talked about weird things that happened, like villages that were spared, trees that weren't damaged, and animals that led people to safety before the waves hit. They named themselves children of the soil and said that Earth's anger was not hate but a lesson. Live with her or die by her was the motto that became their symbol. Mara stood in the wreckage of Jakarta with aid workers and pressed her hands into the wet ground. She didn't speak into microphones or devices. Instead, she whispered right to the ground underneath her. We hear you. We need to change. Thousands of people around her knelt quietly, following her lead. For the first time, the solution came not from governments or robots, but from real individuals. And after that, when there was no noise, the tremors got better. The clouds went away. It looked like the earth was listening, but the lesson wasn't mercy. It was a warning. The first punishment had been given, and people finally understood. The world was done with talking. It was making rules for staying alive. The tsunami that wiped out coasts did more than destroy cities. It broke people. In the days that followed, governments rushed to restore order, but everyone had a different view of what order was. There were two conceptions of the world, and neither of them would give in. One side wanted to give up. They called themselves the Stewards, and said that to survive, people had to do what the earth wanted. Politicians, philosophers, and regular people who agreed with the children of the soil said that industry should be shut down. People should stop buying things, and all human laws should be rewritten to put the world above people. During their protests, individuals lay on the ground with their hands on the ground and chanted in time with the earthquakes. Their warning was clear. If you fought against Earth, you would die. The Defiants stood against them. They saw the Earth as an enemy, not a mother, a god, or a ruler. Generals, business executives, and fanatics said that giving up to the planet meant giving up on the future of civilization. They said the tsunami was not punishment, but a declaration of war, and war could be countered. We built cities, one defiant leader yelled on live TV. We split atoms, we reached the stars. If the Earth herself challenges us, we must show her that people do not kneel. The motto, rule or be ruled, was on their flags. The break was complete. Families broke up, religions fell apart, and countries fought one another. Survivors amid the ruins of Manila fought over food shipments not just because they were scarce, but also because they were loyal. Would they only accept help if it came with steward assurances of simplicity or defiant pledges of retaliation? In Geneva, the Parliament of Survival fell apart into anarchy, with delegates leaving the room in anger and groups forming on different continents. No longer was one species confronting one enemy. Instead, two civilizations were at war over ideas. The Earth, for her part, seemed to get it. In defiant strongholds, tremors got stronger, and storms swirled above industrial areas that wouldn't stop making things. Villages that were allied with the Stewards, on the other hand, reported an extraordinary calm, as if they were safe from the anger that was raging elsewhere. For many, this was confirmation that the Earth had picked sides. Some people thought it was manipulation, a way to make people weaker from the inside. Religions made the gap bigger. Churches in South America that were part of the Stewards said that the world was holy, and that its voice was the word of a living God. In North America, defiant cults grew, proclaiming that people had a divine right to take over even their own world. Temples became into fortifications, mosques turned into places to talk about things, and cathedrals turned into places to plan wars. Faith no longer brought people together. It made them stronger. The economies also fell apart. Steward nations tore down their factories and turned them into farms, bartering technology for food to stay alive. Energy networks went down, and simple gadgets were put in their place to keep the Earth happy. In defiant nations, the opposite happened. Militarization rose, science sped up, and labs produced systems that could channel, weaponize, and even fight back against Earth's own earthquakes. People started talking about seismic bombs, which are machines made to break fault lines on purpose to show that people could rock the Earth as much as she shook them. There were millions of people who didn't want either war or surrender. Refugees going inland, farmers clinging to burned land, and children who lost their parents to the sea. All they wanted was to stay alive. But survival required loyalty. In this broken time, being neutral meant being a traitor. Mara, the linguist, became a symbol without meaning to. Many people were moved by her words, act as one species, but now both sides were using them in a way that was wrong. The stewards used her words to get people to follow Earth. The Defiants made fun of her for being naive and called her the mouthpiece of surrender. She walked through refugee camps, listening to voices that were lost in the clamor. For the first time, she thought that maybe mankind had already decided to die, not by Earth's hand, but by its own separation. And as the groups got ready for the next fight, the ground shook again. Not a quake, not a storm, but a pulse, steady, planned, and waiting. The Earth still hadn't made up its mind about her final verdict, but people were already writing their own. The break in humanity had been loud, but the next step was up to the Earth itself, not men or governments. For weeks, earthquakes silently shook the ground beneath the continents as if the Earth was taking a deep breath before a scream. Scientists warned that pressure was growing in the mantle, and that volcanic activity was rising in patterns that were too coordinated to be natural. Both stewards and defiants prayed for different things while looking at the seismographs. One side asked for mercy, and the other asked for proof of an enemy that could be attacked. The cry came in flames. It started in the Pacific, when the ring of fire woke up as if someone had touched it. The ash clouds from volcanoes in Chile and Japan darkened the skies within hours of one another. Ash landed on cities that were thousands of kilometers away, making daytime look like nighttime. Lava floods engulfed whole islands, killing everyone on them without a sound. Earthquakes came one after the other, not at random, but like steps in a planned march. The world was no longer quiet. It was howling. But the worst part was when Yellowstone, which had been feared for a long time and had been dormant for a long time, erupted. The supervolcano blew up, and the explosion could be heard on other continents. It sent fire and ash into the stratosphere. A cloak of darkness swept across North America, hiding the sun. Crops died, rivers boiled, and whole states became into deserts. The Defiants had established their labs and weapons in those regions, and with one blow, their heartland was wiped out of history. Billions of people watched as satellite feeds showed the skies getting darker, the jet streams moving, and the Earth itself changing its climate in response. It was no longer just a hypothesis about the end of the world. It was the end of the world that was happening, selected and planned. The stewards got down on their knees. In Africa, Asia, and South America, their movements turned into regimes that said the only way ahead was for everyone to submit. Their leaders shouted, "Earth has spoken. Bow or die." Cities turned off their power systems, factories took apart their machines, and millions of people left coastal and industrial areas to go inland in search of peace. They had to be quiet to stay alive, and being quiet meant following orders. But the Defiants did not give in. They swore revenge from the ashes of their shattered heartlands. Generals stood in bunkers with failing power and announced the building of seismic weapons that would break fault lines and fight the Earth on our own terms. Their propaganda transformed misfortune into proof. If Earth is afraid enough to strike, then she knows we are dangerous. That dread is what we use to fight. Their broken armies marched into regions that had already been ravaged, hoisting flags over cities that had already been covered in ash. The numerous innocent people who were caught in the midst were the refugees roaming under blackened sky, families starving because their harvests failed, and children coughing in the soot of their own homes. They thought that both stewards and defiants were fanatics. To survive, you didn't have to bow or fight, you only had to last. But to endure, you needed a place to stay, and both sides wanted loyalty. Mara, who is now known all over the world, spoke up for those in between. She stood among the wreckage of Geneva's parliament and spoke to the people, not the leaders. This is not Earth's war. It is our exam. We had an option, and instead of coming together, we decided to break apart. And now we have to pay for it. Her comments traveled, but it wasn't clear if they inspired or condemned. Some others thought she was a prophet. Some people called her a traitor. This time, the earth didn't say anything. It was silent. The shaking stopped. The sky eventually cleared, leaving behind a landscape that was dark and wounded. For some, it was mercy, a last chance to change. For some, it was only the stillness before the next act. And as people struggled under the weight of ash and discord, one reality stood out more than the clouds above. The earth was not done. The core was waking, and the next roar might not leave anyone alive. The hush following the eruptions was thicker than ash. For a short while, they were shocked, as if they were waiting for the earth to hit them again. But when none came, the break got bigger. The stewards dubbed it a reprieve, which showed that following the rules calmed the planet's anger. The Defiants called it hesitancy, which showed that the earth could be challenged and even compelled to give in. Silence, which used to be scary, became the most hazardous fuel for conflict. Cities in Europe, Asia, and Africa that were associated with the stewards turned off their lights, tore down factories, and limited how much energy they used. Governments said they were the protectors of the will of the earth, and they used the soil as a flag and an oath. They said that the only way to avoid the next punishment was to submit, and their troops made sure that people did what they were told. Drones that used to be employed for business now patrolled cities to make sure machines stayed stationary. Ironically, their buzzing wings gobbled up the power they were supposed to keep from using. Amid the meantime, the Defiants honed their wrath into steel amid the burned-out deserts of North America. They pulled prototypes of rudimentary but terrifying seismic weapons out of bunkers. These weapons were made to send focused vibrations into the crust. They said these things may hurt the earth like she had hurt them. One general said, "If the ground is alive, we will hit her heart until she bleeds." Refugees and their nations had to march under their flags, which were part of forces that pledged revenge louder than anguish. There was no way to avoid a clash between the two visions. The first fight happened in the ruins of Lisbon. Once a bastion for the stewards, its leaders told businesses to close and streets to become farmland. Defiant agents broke in, set fire to warehouses, and accused the stewards of betraying the future of humanity. When soldiers got there, fighting broke out in the tiny streets and weapons cracked under skies that were still gray from volcanic ash. The earth didn't do anything. For the first time, the fight was not between people and the earth, but between people and themselves. The war expanded from Lisbon. In the Mediterranean, there were naval battles between steward ships enforcing green embargoes and defiant convoys smuggling technology across dark seas. In Africa, cities were divided in half, with one region singing hymns of submission and the other drilling for resources in defiance. Bombs went off in Cairo, riots broke out in Lagos, and rumors spread that people had lost their enemy and found a new one in their own image. There were no more parliaments of survival. Instead, there were two councils that wouldn't even share a room. The Steward Council made public statements of faith, promising that the earth would protect them as long as they were humble. The Defiant Command responded with broadcasts of pride, displaying weapons tests that shook the ground and dared the earth to reply. Each side said they were right. Each side said it was their fate, and in between, millions of people who had to leave their homes floated like shadows, unwelcome by either side. Mara was in despair as her words of togetherness becoming more twisted. Both sides used parts of her speeches to support their own points of view. To the stewards, she was the prophet of giving up. To the Defiants, she was a stupid, foolish person who showed how fragile people are. She tried to speak for the refugees, but her words were lost in the noise of two armies getting ready for war. The first real war between groups was not subtle at all. In the rubble of Chicago, Defiant generals used their first seismic cannon, which generated fake earthquakes that shook the ground. The earth did not fight back, but the steward troops saw the stillness as a sign that their faith had been betrayed, so they fired missiles back. The city, which was already damaged, burnt again. Its towers fell, and its streets were full of bodies, with people fighting each other while the ground stayed still. The earth was silent for the first time since it woke up. No storms, no earthquakes, no eruptions. There was just silence, as if the world had pulled back to watch its children eat each other. In that quiet, the war of faiths had begun. For months, people killed each other in the war of faiths. Cities turned into battlefields, oceans into graveyards, and the skies turned dark with the smoke of human pride. The stewards made people obey by shutting down machines and breaking up businesses. The Defiants used their rudimentary seismic weapons to pound the Earth's crust, as if to get her to answer. The world was strangely calm through it all. No earthquakes, no storms, no eruptions, nothing but quiet. That quiet was too much to take. For the Stewards, it was a mystery. Had their giving up not been enough? For the Defiants, it was proof of weakness. The Earth had roared once, but now she was afraid of what people would do. Each side got more stubborn, seeing absence as proof. And then, all of a sudden, the silence was broken. It started in the air. Satellites saw huge storms brewing all around the world, not just in one area. Cyclones formed at the same time in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. Their spirals were so big that they seemed like mirrors of one another. Clouds got thicker over land, and they spread out in patterns that seemed too symmetrical to be real. Scientists, who were watching satellite feeds, whispered what no one wanted to say. The storms were in sync. The sky turned, become a fight for the Earth. It didn't rain because of the weather. It rained because of orders. Torrents inundated industrial areas that were still in use. Cities that called themselves Defiant were flooded in just a few days, and their streets became rivers of destruction. Power plants caught fire and went out. Electrical lines shorted, and factories fell apart under the constant rain. But in Steward territories, the storms acted in a different way. They didn't hit with rage. They hit with creepy accuracy, watering crops in arid areas, filling rivers that had gone dry, and bringing back equilibrium where submission had already taken hold. The Earth wasn't just angry. It was making a choice, punishing one side and rewarding the other. The effect happened right away. Defiant generals yelled that the planet was controlling people and making them follow orders out of fear. They ordered counterstrikes, firing missiles against Steward lands in the hopes of breaking apart the alliance that was building around submission. But when their weapons flew through the air, lightning from the storms fried guidance systems and blew up warheads in the air. It was as if the Earth herself slapped the missiles away. The Steward Council sent out messages of victory, saying they were right. They said, "The Earth has chosen us. Her mercy is for those who bow. Come with us and live." Their towns sparkled softly as life returned. Lush fields spread out, pure rivers flowed, and even when the skies were turbulent, the air got clearer. For their adherents, it was proof that God was on their side. For their opponents, it was proof that they were slaves. But even her friends couldn't stand how much it cost to get involved. The storms that were happening at the same time didn't cease. They went across the world over and over again, causing floods, hunger, and havoc in every place that people touched. The waves covered up trade routes. Refugee camps sank. Even if the Steward communities weren't completely destroyed, they had a hard time with the frequent rain. The cost of being chosen was living, but not peace. Mara watched from Geneva, her heart hurting as she heard the news. She observed Stewards rejoice their saved lands, while Defiant migrants perished just outside their borders. She observed the Defiants becoming stronger, as their anger grew with each city that sank. And over all else, she heard the voice of the world roll through the storms again. "You split. I make the choice." The words echoed like thunder throughout every continent. There was no need for a translation this time. The meaning was clear, basic, and indisputable. The civil war amongst humans didn't matter. The Earth was the judge, jury, and executioner, and her decision was already being carried out in the sky. The Defiants, on the other hand, wouldn't give in. They swore to get back at them in bunkers dug deep into the mountains. They tried out new weaponry and gadgets that weren't meant to rock the Earth, but instead drilled deep into the mantle to hurt the heart of the globe. They promised that the storms would not decide the fate of humanity. Only people could accomplish that. The Stewards, on the other hand, said that their partnership was complete. The Soil Pact brought together many nations into one group that claimed to be in charge of the destiny of Earth. They welcomed everyone who turned their back on computers and listened to the voice of the planet. Their flags flew in half the world, and with every flood that spared their farms, they felt more and more sure of themselves. The storms kept coming. The Earth had chosen, but not out of kindness, out of strategy. Every drop of rain and every boom of thunder changed the balance of power. People wanted to make their own choices. Instead, it was being shaped, damaged, and driven to fit her will. And in that new configuration, the conflict was far from ended. It had only gotten sharper. The storms that hit at the same time had broken countries, but they had not broken the Defiants. The constant downpour just made them more determined. Their scientists revealed Project Hammerfall, a weapon not meant to scar the surface but to hit the heart of the Earth. From bunkers buried under mountains of ash, it was a drill. Although that word doesn't really do it justice. There were miles of steel coils that spiraled down and had plasma borers on the ends that could melt rock like wax. The machine was built to go down into the mantle itself, using stolen grids and desperation as fuel. The Defiant command said, "If the Earth is alive, then she has a heart. If she has a heart, we'll stab it." When the Soil Pact heard about the weapon, the Stewards were horrified. Their leaders sent out warnings on all channels, saying that Hammerfall was crazy, suicidal, and blasphemous. One priest from the Stewards said, "The Earth gives us breath and they would choke her lungs. If they hit her, they hit all of us." But no one listened to the warnings. The Defiants no longer wanted to win. They wanted to rule or die trying. Hammerfall started in secrecy under the rubble of Denver. The drill bore into the crust, boring down with an unending hunger. Tremors spread throughout the plains. The Earth reacted right away. Storms changed, lightning came together, and tremors spread out like anguish. But the machine kept going. The planet roared louder the deeper it went. Then came the revenge. The ground cracked. Not a fracture or a fissure, but a wound that runs through the middle of continents. From Alaska to Patagonia, from Siberia to the Indian Ocean, a huge rift opened up, as if the Earth itself were separating her children. Cities plummeted into the void. Rivers turned around and flowed back into the blackness. The tops of whole mountain ranges fell away, and the molten fire underneath burned them. The scar, as it came to be known, split the world not by politics, but by rock and lava. The Steward Pact, which was on one side of the chasm, had territories that were damaged but still standing. The other half, the Defiant lands, were cut off from the rest of the world by the Gulf. Their forces were stuck and their bunkers were shaking. The Earth had established its own border, one that was deeper than any conflict between people had ever made. Billions of people observed the break from space, their mouths hanging open in shock. The world had spoken without saying a word. There was no denying it now. Earth was alive and willing to hurt herself to make her point known. The effects were felt right away. The trade fell apart. Refugees stuck on one side of the scar pleaded to cross, but bridges and ships were useless against a wound that extended for thousands of miles and spewed magma into the sky. The Steward Pact said that the separation was proof of their righteousness. Earth herself has separated the faithful from the damned. The Defiants were furious and called the scar a challenge. Their generals yelled, "She is so afraid of us that she locks us up." But cages can be broken. Mara watched the news in quiet in the ruins of Geneva. Neither side wanted the scar. It was a sign. She put her hand on a globe and followed the line where the Earth had split in two. "She is telling us what we have become," she said in a low voice. A species split seen in her own body. But no one paid attention. People all throughout the world were too busy celebrating, mourning, or getting ready for the last battle. Hammerfall kept drilling far below the surface, slower, weaker, but not dead. The Defiance kept going. The wound on the Earth was open, her patience was gone, and her next roar promised not separation, but death. The scar had torn the planet in two, yet Hammerfall kept drilling. Its coils kept spinning, digging deeper into the mantle, and every vibration was an insult to the planet's own heart. The Stewards, who were on the other side of the gap, pleaded for Earth to act before the Defiants broke something that couldn't be fixed. The Defiants, who were so angry they couldn't see straight, called their advance a victory. One general said, "The planet bleeds, and when she bleeds we will rule." But Earth has had enough. The waters were the first place to show signs. Tides changed violently, not because of storms but on purpose. The seas swelled along the Defiant coasts, not like floods but like jaws closing and engulfing whole cities. New trenches sprang out on the ocean below, pulling fleets into the dark. Waves didn't hurt the coasts of Steward. Instead, they curled around them like hands shielding weak soil. But though the Stewards were happy, they were also uneasy about the fact that they had to kill someone else to stay alive. The fire came next. Volcanoes didn't just erupt at random times. They did so in a chain across the Defiant hemisphere. Ash clouds made the day seem like it would never end. The survivors walked across landscapes that seemed more like the underworld than Earth. Crops withered, rivers boiled, and survivors stumbled through them. The Defiants battled back in vain, blasting missiles into heavens that swallowed them with lightning and burrowing deeper with Hammerfall, even as the crust underneath them melted. Their battle cry turned into a death chorus that echoed through vacant cities. The Stewards declared triumph since they were spared the worst. Their leaders stood in public squares and said that Earth had chosen them to protect it. In every capital, temples went up, farms flowered as the rains came back, and their flags of surrender flew over communities that thought the fight was finished. But under the hymns was quiet. People who lived murmured that maybe they hadn't been picked for a reward, but for a duty, to endure, to remember, and to serve. It didn't feel like a victory to survive anymore. It felt like being exiled. Mara, who was observing from what was left of Geneva, knew what others were too afraid to tell. "She isn't sparing us," she said softly into her recordings. "She is breaking us up. We are the scar that is on her body." One half was put out and the other half was accepted. But both were found guilty. It wasn't storms or earthquakes that caused the last act. It was from within. Hammerfall, in its last desperate fall, finally hit a pocket of molten rage that no human should have touched. The machine broke through it, causing a convulsion that shook the whole world. Strongholds that refused to give up fell into the chasm. The weight of their own pride made whole continents groan. And then there was stillness. Hammerfall was gone, engulfed by magma, along with its creators. The earth spoke one last time. "You have made a choice. One half lives and the other half dies. But the cut is still there. You are the mark." The words echoed through every stone, root, and ocean wave. No one cheered or fought back this time. The point of the message wasn't to win or give up. It was to stay. The split between people had been carved into the earth itself, and nothing could change it, even generations later. When the Stewards' children strolled across fields that were once again full of flowers, they would still see the scar stretching beyond the horizon, a memory engraved into the bones of the earth. When they inquired why, their elders would tell them the truth. The planet judged them when they tried to talk to it. Not mercy was survival. It was a sentence. In reality 999, though, humanity had not been wiped out. It had been split up forever. Welcome to Beyond the Fractals. Subscribe now and explore every reality.